Right, let's get started. Kia ora everyone. So we're here to give an update around the Māori engagement framework and seek some guidance from Council today. This is Aroha Pako, for everyone that doesn't know her. Aroha is our cultural outcomes lead, together with Ricky Heihei. Aroha and I are going to tag team this presentation. Aroha's feeling a little bit nervous, so if we can just make sure that we frame our questions in a way where hopefully between Aroha and I we can answer them. So what's the purpose of today's presentation? So we're going to update you on the framework. We're going to outline what we've been doing. We're going to outline a proposed approach, proposed format for the framework, and talk through some timeframes. And we're also going to be seeking some direction and guidance from Council so that we can move forward with confidence on next steps. Now, there are some questions we're going to ask of you, and you don't need to answer them now because we're going to come back to them at the end of the presentation, but I just want to give you an early signal on what those questions are so that as we go through the presentation, you can think about them. So we're asking you, are you comfortable with the approach? Do you support the establishment of the advisory group in the format that we're going to present to you very shortly? Do you need a formal report to the 25th of October Council meeting to appoint the elected members to the advisory group, or can you just give us that guidance now so that we can get going? We're going to ask you around whether you support a meeting fee for iwi and hapu participation in the advisory group to reduce any barriers for participation. Obviously, as part of the pre-reading, we sent you a number of documents that has kind of formed part of our research to date, and we particularly wanted councillors to read the Waikato Regional Council Māori Engagement Framework, and Aroha will speak a little bit to that more when she takes you through the proposed format. But one of our questions is, if we think about what good looks like, does the Waikato Regional Council Māori Engagement Framework meet your expectations on what we might actually deliver out of this? And then we also just wanted to check if there's any other expectations or direction as elected members you'd like to give. Feel free to ask questions as we go as well. You're allowed to ask us questions since we're asking you questions too. And then also just kind of in the where are we as governors right now. So you're in the no, I think you're in the no-see triangle, but I just want to check in with elected members that that's where you think you're at. So you're not developing the Māori engagement framework, and you'll see soon around through the proposed project approach where we think the do happens. But certainly you're wanting to see that it happens and you're wanting to know that it happens. But today is about getting enough direction so that we can do it. So where we've been at in the last couple of months is that we've kind of been in a phase of discovery. That's not a legal word, that's a Monique word. Where we've been taking the time to do some early engagement with our iwi partners, where we've talked to them about the intent around the Māori engagement framework, sought some early kind of thinking from them to understand how this might align with some of the existing partnership work or existing partnership agreements, hear what some barriers to participation might be. But Aroha in particular has been, I suppose, scanning our colleagues across local government and looking at what other councils are doing well to try and find, I suppose, well, what would good look like, and hence why we've specifically referenced the Waikato Regional Council work, but also provided you copies of documents like the Rotorua District Council policy around the guidance on meeting fees and remuneration. So that's what we've been up to, and we now think we're ready to kind of take the next step. And so I'm going to hand over to Aroha, who's going to talk a little bit about what the proposed timeframe is.
Kia ora tātou. So we've developed a timeline with milestones, as you'd see there. As Monique said, through July to September has been quite a bit of research to see what other councils are doing, other frameworks they've got up and running, what looks good, what looks good but probably not ready for us. And that's why we thought Waikato Regional Council's framework did look like it would be appropriate for us at this time, and some early engagement. So this month we're hoping to hui with each iwi group. So we want to hear their aspirations and what they want out of this framework. Obviously, we're going to be starting with some developing some background content in the meantime. By November, we should have collated the feedback from those hui and have a draft scope of the template in development. December, we're hoping to hui with all iwi partners that are represented and present the feedback from the earlier hui. If agreed, this is when we're going to establish the project advisory group and have the draft template outline finalised. So through January to June, so it's all content development, and you'll see there that we've allowed a section per month, and the next slide kind of outlines a little bit more of what those sections entails, and hoping to have the final review and presentation in June. So there are 4 components of the framework, starting with the why. So the whole purpose, why is it important that we engage with Māori? So starting with our te tiriti obligations or the legislative obligations, mutual benefits, etc. The second, so that's all going to be the stats of the makeup of Māori and Horowhenua, plus the background and history, any current partnerships, arrangements, platforms, anything that we're doing currently. The third section is all going to be the engagement toolkit and approach. So a step-by-step guide for staff from the get-go, teaching them how to know that they need to engage, what they do, and steps to follow. And you may have noticed in the Waikato Regional Council's framework that they used the International Association for Public Participation, or IAP2 spectrum, methods, there's remuneration, approach and guide, and that is all in the Waikato one. And I've spoken to the team who developed it, and they've given me the contact for the IAP2 person that they worked with to tailor it to Māori and to their rohe, or their area. And the fourth part is implementation. So once everyone's kind of looked at all that information, taken it on, how can they actually implement it? We don't want them to fail by just leaving them to their own devices at that stage. So we'll have follow-on workshops, training sessions, etc. Yep.
So,
Also, just to quickly jump in, so that previous, the one that you were on, yep. So that's pretty much the Waikato full framework components, except for the evaluation part of it. Maybe that's not referencing? Is that planned? Is that just inherent in the whole process?
And obviously the feedback we get from iwi will be put all through it. So, yeah.
So the approach to the engagement that kind of we're proposing but keen to hear your feedback on is that Council's role would be to monitor progress and endorse the direction, ultimately acknowledging that it is Council that will need to adopt the Māori engagement framework and the associated any guidance that falls from that. So, for example, we don't know if it will be an outcome, but if there's a specific remuneration policy that is attached to it. That's council's role. But we are proposing that there are formal progress reports in December, February and April, just so that formally and publicly we're signposting the progress of this important piece of work. The proposal is that we establish a project advisory group, and really their job is in the see and the do. So it's to provide the direction and to guide the development. And early on, council gave us the feedback that this wasn't something that council should just go do. We needed to do it with our iwi and hapu partners. And so what we're proposing is that 3 elected members would sit on that advisory group, and that we would also have representation from Moepuku Tribal Authority, Te Tumata Kahuki and Ngāti Te Kōrehi. And we would anticipate that project group would meet monthly through the course of the project. John?
Do you want to finish the slide, or shall I ask a question now?
I'll finish the slide and then you can ask a question.
Okay.
Obviously, we have statutory obligations to Rangatane and Ngāti Apa, and so the intent would be to have some targeted engagement with Rangatane and Ngāti Apa. The initial thought is that they wouldn't form part of the advisory group, but that we would have the conversation with them. If there was a desire for them to be part of the advisory group, we could cater for that, but more having a conversation with them about where in the process and how early they'd like to be part of any review of a framework. And then just obviously internally we have a project team, and that is me and Brent and Aroha. Brent's not here today, he's at the emergency management exercise, but we've already started meeting weekly to ensure that there's good project structure and I suppose momentum being built around this. I'll take your question, Councillor Proctor.
This is more advice or guidance around the project advisory group. I think you probably should try and invite all 4 iwi, and then have 4 elected members maybe to balance it out. Or the 4 iwi should decide on how they want their project advisory group to be constituted.
Thanks for those comments, Councillor Proctor. Maybe when we come to the end and we kind of seek your direction around the advisory group, we could seek to get some consensus and direction from Council around that. But yeah, acknowledge your comments and appreciate them. I wanted to talk about the implications for the LTP, and so I'd created this slide yesterday that just said, it just had the 2 bullet points, and then at a Te Tumata Kahuki hui last night, Justin asked me a question about how it fits, and I kind of drew a picture, and Paul Grayson got sent a picture of this at 1:15 p.m. to insert into the presentation. We've signalled this to Council in our long-term plan workshop last week, but there are some implications for this around the long-term plan, because of the sequencing of when we're building the long-term plan and when we're developing the Māori engagement framework. And so my advice to Council is that we build our budgets based on status quo, but we do that, and when I say status quo, I mean status quo in terms of existing this year's budget, but we do that with the knowledge that I suppose we're giving warning, and we're all assuming that there'll be a point in time in the process, which is likely going to be at the hearing stage, where you can expect a management submission into the long-term plan that looks to ensure that any outcomes from that framework are reflected in budgets. And so the questions that Justin asked me was, how do we manage the sequencing of that? And this picture might not make sense, but it made sense to me at the time I drew it. But this was me, at the top level is our community outcomes, and while there's this big focus on the LTP at the moment, the LTP is kind of the tactical plan that helps us bring to life the strategic objectives of Council. And so it's the Māori engagement framework that will kind of articulate how we bring that community outcome of partnership with tangata whenua to life. It's a little bit complex in that the LTP requires us to have a Māori contribution to decision-making policy, and that needs to be drafted by Christmas. And so the Māori contribution to decision-making policy review will be pretty quick and easy. And I say that like not to be condescending. I'm more as in it's probably going to be a status quo policy that acknowledges that we are developing the Māori engagement framework. The long-term plan will be adopted with the current policy probably. Council will have considered a new framework, and then the policy will need to get reviewed again next year. And that's kind of just process. But what's most important is that at the right time, once the Māori engagement framework is in a format where Council have endorsed it and given it mandate, that the LTP is able to give effect to that by ensuring that any budgets are reflected in it. And so you can't really see my numbers here, but I numbered them all 1, 2, 3, not in any particular order. But the Māori engagement framework kind of takes us, if we achieve the milestones, albeit they're probably ambitious, of a June 24 adoption of the Māori engagement framework, that's a constant piece of work until June next year. The LTP, and from a Māori engagement sense in terms of budgets, that happens between now and Christmas, and then there'll be, come submissions and decision-making time, we'll need to pick that up again and reflect the Māori engagement framework. The policy has some work on it now, but then we'll pick the policy up again once the framework is adopted. John?
Yeah, you kind of lost me a little bit. So from a basic point of view, the quantum of money that we set aside for Māori engagement won't change through the LTP process, or may change based on submissions or something like that. But then the way that money gets allocated is then defined by the engagement strategy upon its completion. Is that right?
What I'm suggesting is that on the basis that the direction from Council has been a zero-based budgeting process, the zero-based budgeting process is very difficult to do without the Māori engagement framework, which is ideally going to be the framework that does determine what resources are required for the future and how we allocate them. So the budgets that we're building right now and that we'll present to Council throughout November and December, I'm suggesting that they are based on status quo. Or alternatively, you could give me some direction to put some, to build some hypothetical assumptions in there. But that before you adopt the long-term plan, we need to be so far down the track with the Māori engagement framework that we can present a submission that isn't just about how the current funds are allocated, John, but what funds are required. So that could be an increase, or it could be the same, or it could be a decrease. That depends where this table's perspective is. I'll get my picture designed in a digital format.
It's not the picture, it's just the sequencing of events and the potential outcomes of each that could happen during the LTP process. That's all. Sorry, I'm just trying to get my head around it.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to highlight that, it is tricky because we're building budgets now. And so how do we make sure that we don't get into a position of adopting an LTP and adopting a Māori engagement framework that don't talk to each other? So that's what I'm going to try build, is a process where it allows them to talk.
Well, there's also an issue with expectations from iwi in an engagement process on what they would be expecting as an outcome, and whether their expectations meet what we've budgeted in the LTP as well.
Yeah. So that kind of comes to the end of the presentation. We're happy to take questions, but maybe we'll take questions and then we'll come back to the questions that we're asking of you. Are there any questions before you give us feedback on these specific questions?
Tēnā kōrua, aroha Ricky, Monique. Thank yous for the mahi you presented here today. I feel like we're definitely on the right track. I just quickly looking at some of the Māori engagement. Where's that other one? Something decision to making. That policy one. So yeah, I was just checking some of the ones that are already there. And I see Central Hawke's Bay and Waiking TMs, and all of them have got some quite good ones there. So I'm guessing, as you said, it's not that hard to critique one that suits us here. The only real question I have, and it's probably more a consideration than anything, is we're talking about a Māori engagement framework, and I get that, and we can draw upon all this information. I suppose sometimes I think about flipping things, and I wonder about what does a Horowhenua District Council Māori engagement look like. And the reason I ask that is quite simply, I don't think there's a policy or a process that we have here in council that actually clearly articulates how we expect iwi hapu to engage us. So I'm sort of trying to flip it. I don't know if that's too hard to grasp, but I sort of think about things like that too, because we're out there, and the reason I say that about flipping it, then you actually can critique it and design it to what this community needs. Because a lot of those places that we're talking about here are post-settlement, they're in different stages of processes, and so while we can follow suit, it may never actually suit. And so that's why I just say if the team would consider maybe another lens, and that we have our own policy here that we design that informs our iwi partners, our hapu, about actually when you come into this space, this is how you engage us, or this is how we expect you to engage us perhaps. So if I'm off the mark, that's fine, but I just thought I'd throw that as a consideration. But I actually enjoyed the presentation and what you presented thus far.
Thanks, Justin, because that was a question I had. Where's the other party to this, and what's the return, if you like? Imagining a tennis court type of thing in terms of allowing back. A question I maybe had for you in terms of to Te Tumata Kāhoki, in terms of Wehi Wehi, Perirakawa, and those other things, those other hapu, in terms of, the conversation that we had with Wehi Wehi, they regard themselves separate, and we don't see Perirakawa in there, and I just wondered, how do we, is that our responsibility, or is that Te Tumata Kāhoki's responsibility to ensure they're represented?
I think it's part of the council opportunity to seek clarity about how the partners want to be engaged, because although some may wish to be autonomous, and yes, they all belong as part of Roko or what have you, but I think there's the ability for those that when you flesh this out, they still have that option with this council to say, actually, we'll remain as part of Tumata Kāhoki, or we won't. The good thing about that is that it's going to inform us, how do we facilitate, I don't want to say the word resource because that always adds to money. How do we facilitate their needs, and that works with us?
Yeah, but I think at a higher level, the Crown recognises 4 iwi within our region. And I think we've got to stick with that basis. I mean, we can't keep mixing iwi and hapu up and then providing different numbers on boards and advisory groups. I think we've got some quite clear steers from the government around treaty settlements and treaty partners. And then we have 2 iwi which aren't settled. So I think we have to be quite strict in the way that we approach this and not provide too much, I suppose, uncertainty around the way that we manage the situation. The uncertainty then creates issues that we're not going to achieve the engagement framework.
I support that, Jonathan. Actually, I consider 5 iwi. I understand this council are obliged to engage. So I don't see any reason why we wouldn't or couldn't involve all 5 at the very start. And I don't think this council need to navigate about what that looks like going forward. I think the iwi could have their own conversations about who wants to be in and or how they want to be seen within the district or whatever. I don't think that's something council want to impress on them.
The other thing I noticed now about this Waikato regional one was it's very staff orientated, and I think there does need to be some, if you like, governance sort of engagement, acknowledgement in there, because we need that just as much as you need guidance. We need to ensure that we are actually, I suppose, if you like, keeping the staff accountable, that we are recognising that engagement framework properly. Right? You understand what I'm saying?
So, maybe let's just go through question by question. So, we're generally comfortable with approach.
Jonathan, Sam, do you want to, if you disagree with the consensus, seems to be yes, but if you've got other alternate views?
I'm fine with the approach, although I can see some issues already creeping in where the council needs to have a firmer opinion on its direction. But anyway, yes.
I'm sure that'll be noted.
And so, if we go back to the advisory group, which and there's already been some conversation about it should be the 5 recognised iwi.
Can you go back to your plan of attack? Like that, yeah, that. I think those hui you hold in October with the groups should determine what that policy, who makes up that group, because some might be, want to join together and some might not. And I think it's too early for us to say. Because do you agree, Nina? I wouldn't like to hold Jonathan's stance firmly. I'd like to see that happen before it lands.
So I agree that the hui with iwi needs to happen, so that we can identify, because at this table at Horowhenua District Council, we have to determine the iwi that we're going to deal with, whether it's those that are currently mandated or not by the Crown, or we choose someone that may not be. But this council has to determine who those players are, because I don't know that we know that. It feels like we don't know. And so, like, for me, first priority is I need to know who's on my team. Who are they? And I don't know that I haven't heard that out loud from this council, because I know that we go back and forwards about, with rangitane and their part in our rohe. Are they or aren't they? I just would like to know who are the players. Who are the iwi that we believe at Horowhenua District Council should be a part of our Māori engagement framework. So.
And so I'm just thinking through some process around that. So if we took on the feedback that let's not be stuck in the mud about the membership of the project advisory group until we've had that, I suppose, formal sit down. What I'm wondering is if we could tie this up with the review of the Māori contribution to decision-making policy ahead of the LTP, because in the December council meeting, we could bring the draft Māori contribution to decision-making policy to council for adoption, which would like in my view, Nina, that policy already answers that question, but I think we're clear, but let's go through that process and let's let this hui feed into that, because at the same time as adopting the draft Māori contribution to decision-making policy, which then goes into the LTP, that can also be like maybe that relieves some of your concerns, John, about how we're not staunch on it, and so the December decision can be, well, then council is staunch on it, whatever it is.
Yeah, no, those hui need to happen. You've got October 23 there, obviously.
Yeah, so we'll do the hui kind of over the next 4 to 6 weeks. Parallel to that, we're reviewing the Māori contribution to decision-making policy anyway. And this is where they kind of feed into each other. Any other feedback around the approach to the establishment of the advisory group?
For me, around clarity might be, will this work be in association with current agreements that we already have, or is this being costed over and above arrangements, so this is like a whole new thing? Just so in my mind I know, so that we all actually know, how does this get funded?
Yeah, so that's kind of one of the things we wanted to get feedback on, because already in the conversation, early engagement that we've had, capacity to engage is a challenge, and even the idea of offering a meeting fee to try and reduce the barrier for participation, it's not about the money, it's about the time, and the time for the people who have the mandate of their iwi to come to the table and engage in a way that is meaningful. And so, like, there isn't a specific budget line for this piece of work. However, council have identified it as a priority. One of the pieces that we'd like to get some advice or get a steer on is that my sense is that this does need to be above and beyond, or it needs to at least reflect that currently we have different types of arrangements, and those different types of arrangements might need to reflect what additional support might need to be provided.
Yeah, so I suppose for clarity for me, what I was probably asking and didn't ask very well was, so we currently meet the various iwi at various times anyway. I'm sure we've signalled to them that council are already undertaking this process. How much can we use that time to land at some places before we go into the appointment of the advisory group, where I guess that's going to kick in, a different mechanism?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't understand the question. Like that is the intention, is to use the existing hui or time. An example is obviously as part of our long-term plan, we've already reached out to our iwi partners around trying to lift the level of engagement, and so the idea that we're wanting to meet with them to talk about what does good look like for the long-term plan, not having 2 meetings that trying to connect conversations where we can. But we won't get it perfect, Councillor Tamihana, but certainly would try. So is there general support for introducing a meeting fee that would reduce any barriers for participation in the advisory group? That was then consistent across the board?
I absolutely support it, and we've talked about levels of remuneration. Well, we haven't. Different models have talked about levels of remuneration and so on. But I think in terms of the whole manner of the process, that it's really important that there be some form of remuneration. Just a question at the same time, did we discuss whether it should take a formal report? Well, I've got some thoughts about that later.
Sam?
Yeah, just a question around, I would have thought this type of thing around developing relationships and how we work is already within the scope of our existing resource agreements because it's fundamental. So, like, for me, it feels like this is already something that we are resourcing, like to participate in a discussion around how we should work together. That should be the fundamental basis of the agreements that we already have in place. So it feels like if we introduce another layer around developing this process, well, what's the purpose and intent of the existing resource agreement? But how do we justify that?
I hear you, Sam, but my thoughts are is that this council have got inconsistent arrangements right now, and I think this is part of a reset to try and re-establish a better way of council working with our iwi, but that's just my unprofessional opinion.
So for the development stages of this, then it's considered one-off rather than ongoing.
Sam, I think that I hear your perspective, and I also kind of conscious that there is different arrangements. I think what we're trying to the purpose of seeking a meeting fee for between now and June for the dedicated work around the Māori engagement framework would be to try and I suppose remove any barriers that there's other priorities or other kaupapa that our iwi partners are involved in, that like we've got a time frame here that we're trying to work towards. I know it might feel like it means that we've got to be, because it goes against the some of the direction that council have given around LTP in terms of keeping within a budget. The partnership agreements are the thing that's there, but this is like a specific discrete piece of work that if it's that important and we feel like it's going to help shape future direction to allow the reset of the partnership agreements, I suppose the question is, do councils agree that that's going to help?
Can I respond to that, Monique? I guess what I'd be looking for then is some indication of what you think this is going to cost, ballpark figure, because that is exactly the concern. It's not just because this is, this is like another proposed spend that's out of LTP, out of an annual plan cycle, where it's unbudgeted. It's just another amount of money that's going to go on to ultimately probably the debt book. I just want to get a sense of where you see that number being. So based on introducing a meeting fee and also the other things that we need to do, where do you see that number sitting?
Yeah, I'd have to come back with some advice around that, Sam. But I can do some thinking about that and circulate that to elected members.
I mean, I'm happy to say, if it's maybe we could just give an indication today about where our appetite is in terms of how much, because I think that's one of the point I'm trying to get to is that at a certain point I feel like it becomes too much, and then it does then anticipate, well, it probably does need a formal council report and some discussion around allocation of funding. But if it's actually not as significant as I just have got no concept of what do we actually think the number's going to be. Is it going to be $5,000 total? Is it going to be 10,000? Is it going to be 50,000? Where do we see it sitting? Because I think that's going to kind of give an indication of certainly support or not from my perspective.
Another way of looking at it is that we've obviously done some early engagement, and we know that reducing barriers for participation is something that has been raised. Another way of looking at it is in the next few weeks in our hui, we specifically ask our iwi partners to identify what is it that is going to, what is it that they would need to enable their full participation in this process, and that feeds into that council report. Sam?
Yeah, look, I'm happy to support that, because I think it has to be really specific, though. It needs to be really clear, so we can make an informed decision.
Any other?
Generally in support of the meeting fee to reduce barriers. Aware of Sam's comment that it is kind of, some of these things may be captured under existing agreements, but we're developing something new that's above and beyond what those agreements captured. So to me, that says why that'd be different. 5 iwi, the table from other councils says this might be a medium meeting, 150 per meeting, 750 per meeting. We have them fortnightly for 6 months. That's $9,000, $10,000 all up. To me, that's chump change in terms of what we already spend on Māori engagement, and worth doing to get it right.
So going back to the obviously one of the things that we're keen to get from you today is, can you give us guidance now on the 3 elected members so we could get going, or do you want a formal report? What I'm wondering is, off the back of that conversation around the meeting fees or the budget required in order to achieve the project, that it might be best that we bring a paper to the 25th of October council meeting that kind of wraps this presentation up into a report and seeks resolution of council on the appointed elected members and the establishment of a budget for the project. Keen to hear views.
And look, I totally support it being in the form of a report to council. I think we mustn't underestimate the significant public interest that lies within our journey around the framework. And live streaming, as is happening now, is one thing, but the live stream, if you're not there watching it at the time, you miss what is a very important conversation. And I think it's important, therefore, that the appointment of the members be very public, and possibly even a vote, that it should be contestable. It shouldn't be a case of we've reached our 3 now, so we've got it done, because I think there should be and will be a real interest around the table in being part of this. And whatever this looks like must look like what it is to the public in a public forum.
Agree with that assessment, David. I'd be keen, though, to understand those councillors who are keen to, be part of that advisory group before that meeting, so that, councillors are reasonably aware of, who is going to be nominated for that. Because I think it does need some thought in terms of who is on that advisory board. The other thing I would hope by making that, I agree with you around the public interest in terms of this. It is high, and we need to make sure we're as open and transparent as possible. And hopefully it won't prevent any hui with, iwi in the meantime, because I think that will come, understanding how they see the process happening might well inform the paper that we're going to receive on the 25th as well. So I don't see any harm in delaying the council appointees to that advisory board till then. But I would be keen to ensure that those that are wanting to be on there did signal that before the day.
Yeah, I'm keen.
Okay, so you're getting a paper on the 25th of October, but the Mayor is keen for you guys, for elected members to signal it's very for elected members to signal interest. And so that paper will seek to appoint elected members, but it will also seek to provide some guidance on how we might appropriately enable participation. And so between now and writing that report in 10 days, we will ask our iwi partners to be specific with us about what they would need and any feedback they have on process. Sorry, Mike.
No, I'm good. I'm just signalling my interest in being on there.
Okay. We've referenced quite a bit the Waikato Regional Council Māori Engagement Framework today, and we've had some good feedback around we'd be keen to see a governance lens to it. That feedback from you, Councillor Tamihana, about how could the framework maybe articulate what council expects back, or kind of what council's rules of engagement are. Is just, if we think, imagine June next year, you're adopting a framework. I know some people have already talked around the table that it's ambitious, and we know that as well. And we have to acknowledge we'll need to, that our input from our iwi partners will be critical in terms of how and when we get there. But does that framework and the references to kind of the templates, does that meet your expectations on what good looks like? Are we aiming at the same thing, or are we talking a different language?
Is it, sorry to butt in, is it worthwhile to do a bit of a comparison over the next few weeks of other councils as well? Or is that too much work? I mean, I pretty much agree that Waikato one might be a good model to use.
Yeah, so that's the work we've done, Jonathan. And I know that we provided you a couple of things as pre-reading, but there is a whole folder of stuff that we'd be happy to share with elected members that Aroha has been collating over the last couple of months. I might get Aroha to talk to it because she can probably comment on kind of the different approaches.
Yeah, so Bay of Plenty Regional Council's framework is quite similar to Waikato. You got Tupiki Order from Wellington, which is more of a strategy-less guide. So I think what our kaimahi are needing is an actual guide on what do they do step by step. So quite a few of the other frameworks from other councils don't have that all-round approach from the why, the who, the what, and the how. And so that's a big reason that we did go with Waikato. But yeah, I have got all those docs, so happy to share them if wanted.
In the research of what you've done up to this point, have you come across or discovered any, I guess, differences within policy on the basis of what Justin raised earlier around being where it's got to with a pre-settlement arrangement, and whether there's an impact on the formation of the framework or the wording? So I guess within the context, it would be useful to just understand, have we thrown that lens over it?
Yes, so being that we are in such a unique landscape here in Horowhenua, that is one of the conversations I had with Waikato, and I asked about their makeup of their iwi. So they have both. They've got settled and pre-settled iwi. So I was asking in terms of the IAP2 and whether that would work for us. And she advised that the person that they worked with looked at their makeup, and because of the both post and pre, it works very well. So it was a model that looks like would work for us too.
My observation of the difference, less so in the policy direction, but where some councils have taken what I would call the next step, is the development of a joint Māori development strategy. So if you look at the Wellington one, it's kind of shifted from, yes, we will engage and this is how we will engage, to here are the outcomes through a partnership lens that we are all holding hands on, and this is how council and iwi partners will work together towards those outcomes, and that's where they've considered what a world post-settlement looks like, but also what that kind of frame of council using different governance or management mechanisms to enable that partnership. Councillor Proctor.
Oh, sorry, I think Sam was first.
Councillor Jennings.
Thanks, and then Jonathan will be able to disagree with what I say, so that works out well. I guess I like the Waikato model document. I think it's good. The thing that is still just that I want to be clear on is the purpose of the framework, because for me it's got to do a couple of things, but I'm also really clear, and this is consistent with the feedback I've provided previously, is that the framework is there for a purpose, but then at a different partnership level, there has to be some form of documentation, agreement, some sort of other layer that then gets into more of those, mutual expectations and obligations, and so it's that piece that Justin referenced before. Because if we're going to be, if there's a commitment of public money or ratepayer money to resourcing agreement, it needs to be really transparent about what the corresponding obligations and rights and expectations are. And so, really agree with the direction of the Waikato Regional Council framework, but I still just want to understand what's the layer that then sits underneath that. Because even what you just referenced there, Monique, about another Māori development strategy, that's at a strategy level. It's not at that level of, what are the mutual rights and obligations? So I want to understand what comes after the framework in terms of what does it actually contemplate as a way of articulating and formalising the partnerships.
Yes. So I just bring you back to this slide where the framework, where we talked about the framework format, and so our expectation is the big piece of work here for us is number 3, because that's where we talk about the how we engage, the method of engagement, and then the how council gives effect to that through the way it enables that. And so our there's two outputs. Now, whether they sit in the framework or are referred to in the framework, but did we provide the Rotorua remuneration guidelines? So that's an example of what might sit in the framework. But we also anticipate, as part of section 3, that we are creating a new template for future partnership agreements. Now, what we've got to acknowledge is that we have existing partnership agreements, and there's process, there's relationships, there's we've got to work through that with our existing partners. But I think councillors have been quite clear in their direction through the CEO KPIs that you do expect an output of this is a new template that becomes the consistent template that helps drive any future arrangements.
Yeah, my apologies. I'd missed that reference to the partnerships template on that slide. So that's great. Thank you.
Councillor Proctor.
I was just going to say that it's great to have that Waikato model, but hopefully the advisory group and the iwi and the councillors on there and the council staff will come up with a unique Horowhenua based engagement framework anyway. So I don't think we should get too hung up on basing ourselves on someone else or other models out there as well. I think you've quite clearly articulated what you want to achieve from this. It's a matter of communicating that with iwi and then coming up with that model together. Sure, the external models are good to have as examples. So yeah, I think we're on the right track.
Yeah, cool. Thank you, Councillor Proctor. Absolutely. Like, this has to reflect a Horowhenua context and aspirations. We were just keen to make sure that we're all on the same page about what type of thing we were aiming for. I'll leave you to wrap it up, Mayor Burney. You're going to... You're going to...
I wanted to ask a question. Am I allowed? Because the Waikato one is quite specific about some of the projects and things that happen in their rohi around joint agreements and management agreements, the special relationship with the rivers and things like that. And so I suppose, I could envisage something along those lines with the lake, with Manawatu River, with different sorts of, major projects that we specifically have engagement processes on, rather than just this holistic sort of things about RMA processes or whatever it is, or different projects. And I know that's probably might even be a bit further down the track, because I think it's a bigger piece of work than just developing an engagement framework. But I don't want to lose sight of maybe that's the place that we could include something like those sorts of things into.
Okay.
Okay, just one more. I was pretty keen on the any thoughts on the iwi environmental management plans that the RMA currently lays out, and if they're on the to stay or to go in the RMA reform. I haven't checked on that. I think.
The new RMA legislation doesn't remove the mana whakahono arrangements, as I understand it. But through the establishment of the regional planning committees, it would intend to kind of give more power to that, but at a regional level. Okay, any other kind of expectations or direction councillors would like to offer? No. Okay, well, thank you for your feedback, and obviously the next step from here is we're working towards that time frame, but we are preparing a report to the Extraordinary Council meeting on the 25th of October. Thank you.
Quick dinner. We were due back at 5:30, were we? Half an hour. We'll start. So have we got, is live streaming on, Grayson? Live streaming's on? Okay. Everybody, live streaming has started. Okay. So we're in Rob's hands, so all over to you, Rob.
Thank you. Right. I control here, do I, Grayson? The purpose of this presentation today, we're here. We're focused on finalising a risk appetite framework that supports a risk appetite statement and provides an accuracy and visibility to the complexities of what needs to be achieved. You'll recall earlier in the year we undertook a risk appetite workshop to establish Council's risk appetite statement. This was a similar approach to what had been applied in the past. In short, the feedback was that we needed it to reflect our community outcomes. The framework presented today has been developed with this in mind and comes from months of work watching, listening, meeting, surveying and communicating. So generally when I've attended meetings or when they're online, I'm watching from a distance. And of course including surveys. So the framework is a foundation for discussion and an opportunity to move forward by testing where Council's risk appetite sits against the current environment and tolerance where it might be placed in the future. Important to the success of the appetite guidance and confirmation from Council so we can move forward with confidence. And so pretty much I want to make sure I'm on the right track. In the past, our appetite has been articulated, presented as a statement. It's not on its own, and on its own it's not enough as it offers little benefit to our organisation. Our risk appetite statement doesn't allow for the complexity of the decision making in local government organisation and was limited in its ability to evolve with major influences, e.g. economic recession, cost of living crisis, global tensions. More importantly, our statement wasn't in tune with our strategic thinking and had little to do with our 5 community outcomes or our top 10 priorities, and that was very much voiced, I think, at our last workshop. Our risk appetite statement remains important in providing a foundation that allows us to maximise the operational objectives while not taking undue risk. However, we want our community to understand what our key risks are. This will improve visibility, consultation and decision making during the journey. So what I represent today isn't an isolated statement, it's a risk appetite framework that has been built around our pillars, priorities and real risks. What we accept today will need to evolve and change as the Council and organisation continues to evolve. The framework will need to be reviewed on an annual basis. The last one was done in 2020, so 3 years between drinks is probably way too long. Given the fact in 2020, although we were going through COVID, we had a relatively healthy economy. So the framework I have built around these principles in respect to the fact that where we implement a risk statement, and it's just a continuous journey, really. We monitor and manage that risk appetite, so it's continuously evolving. How the council's appetite sits today might not be how it sits tomorrow. Identify strategic goals and objectives, which I hope I've articulated pretty well in the document that follows. Create a risk appetite statement, communicate risk appetite statement, and again implement it. So that'll be an ongoing thing moving forward now, and it'll become a lot more familiar with you guys next year and the year after, and years beyond that. In respect to the next review, as we review it will probably be a lot easier. So there's been a significant amount of time and effort put into establishing a risk appetite because we have a relatively new executive team and we have a relatively new council as well. So it's been important that I try and get that as accurate as possible. At the moment, I think collectively we're at a see and do from a position. Whereas we are now moving towards a more need to know from an appetite perspective to where we sit. A lot of the seeing and doing has been watching in the direction that we vote and from conversation around where our appetite sits. So what are the key changes? Our appetite levels are designed to articulate our approach in a positive or glass half full manner rather than a glass half empty. A lot of the terminology we used to use was more based around risk rather than opportunity as well. So we want to try and change the language towards a more positive approach to managing risk. More emphasis on looking at the opportunities rather than terminating the risk. So I always say the failure is not to take the right risks. So we need to move away from trying to trying to terminate risk all the time and at times take well-informed risks. The framework is designed to incorporate the current economic and social environment. So where we sit now, and you'll see as we go through it, where our appetite might have been in the past because we're in a more buoyant economy and we don't have a cost of living crisis, and how it is informing our decisions moving forward. I think that was quite evidential from the rates discussion, where possibly we could have ended up with a 9 or a 10% rate. However, in relation to the cost of living crisis, the appetite was for it to be lower. So we're measuring what is important to the organisation and to the community. At times it will indicate incite uncomfortable conversations. However, this is necessary. The framework is about collective view. As an individual, it's okay to disagree, but the appetite reflects the majority thinking. We are trying to remove the obvious. For example, generally there is a piece in there about our appetite around loss, but I think collectively from an appetite perspective, we have no appetite to lose any money. So whether it's 500,000 or 2 million or 25 million, there is no appetite for us to make mistakes and lose money. The framework is in its infancy, and over time it will mature. What I have provided is a foundation, a draft that is very much open for discussion. One of the key reasons that I've put it up as a framework is to provide context to support our statement. In the past, we've often just done a statement and we've looked at a few boxes against the statement, but there's nothing that articulates why a risk sits at a particular level. So there is a lot of work involved in this, but it's done in a framework, so it explains to anyone that reads it or is interested in the council appetite, especially, I guess, from an officer level perspective. As officers, we're always keen to understand what the council is thinking from an appetite perspective. More and more, I've noticed in more recent months, the questions have been asked around council's appetite for certain situations. So I think a lot of this will come clearer more and more as the framework evolves. So I'm just waiting on the boss.
So Rob, they've all got it in front of them.
Okay.
Don't you? Yeah, so maybe just facilitate the conversation from there while Grayson's figuring it out.
Oh, that's great. Okay, I guess
I've just had a text from Sam too. You can't see him, but he is online. His internet's unstable. That's why his video's not on.
No worries. Without getting into too much of reading the words around the induction and the tolerance levels, the officer of the Auditor General, which is, I guess, probably quite pivotal into the direction that we've taken around the resources being applied to risk today, supported the feedback around evidence greater success in applying a risk appetite approach that was linked to the long-term plan and goal-orientated partnership with tangata whenua, outstanding environment, fit-for-purpose infrastructure, vibrant economy and strong communities, which is our top 10 priorities, and this is very much what the appetite has been levelled around. It's important to engage our appetite by using our top 10 priorities because they support our top 5 community goals, and there's a lot of work that's going on beneath those as priorities as we return back to basics in delivering our key objectives. Risk appetite and tolerance risk, and I'm using the word tolerance a lot because whilst we will maintain a tolerance, an appetite for each of our 5 community outcomes, the tolerance for those at times will have to shift because of the environment. So the risk appetite tolerance risk appetite refers to the amount of risk council is willing to accept in pursuit of its goals. Depending on the nature of the activity, there will be a range of outcomes that the council could accept. This range in outcomes is the organisation's risk tolerance, as I've just explained. In this sense, risk management is about finding an acceptable balance between the impact on objectives, should a risk be realised, and the implications of treating the risk, financial cost, potential service level impacts, etc. It should be recognised that all actions and approaches come with their own risks, which should be considered throughout the risk management process. So, again, just in relation to the fact that when we're doing a lot of our measuring, the word averse and conservative are where we, from a council perspective, move with caution when it comes to from an appetite perspective. Measured is obviously well informed and lesser risks, but justified and flexible is where, from an appetite, where we have an appetite to engage and go full steam ahead, I guess, in respect to what we're trying to achieve. So what I did from the work I've done, and I just want to read a draft of the appetite that I think is appropriate, and I'm more than happy for feedback because it may not be appropriate in your way of thinking. For our that sets the boundaries around the current environment for the assessment that we've got. And then I'll read you the appetite that I think is probably more in tune with where we're heading this year for the next 12 to 24 months. Enterprise risk management has taken centre stage in local government as we grapple with the lingering effects of COVID-19 pandemic. The realisation of the recession, ongoing impacts of catastrophic weather events, ageing infrastructure, increasing debt and rapid pace of change, our council and executive recognise that stronger enterprise risk processes are required to becoming successful in this new era. One aspect of the current risk landscape that we must contend with is the connectivity of the risks. HDC, and to Pitty's point, the trade-offs. HDC is increasingly more interconnected to community partners and contracting local and regionally. As we take this journey to continuously improve our risk maturity as a way to successfully manage the growing interconnectedness of vulnerabilities in the risk landscape, HDC is paying close attention to the accuracy of our risk appetite, sharing this within those partnerships. Accurately articulating Council's risk appetite towards meeting our community outcomes and key focus priorities as a council and local government organisation is essential. It is essential in providing visibility to our community and partnerships to why we make certain decisions, understand certain projects, or what we are willing to do in meeting and achieve results. It really is an opportunity to remove any surprises. During 2023-24 and beyond, HDC will continue to look at all services to seek better ways of achieving agreed outcomes, with additional emphasis on the need for transformational change, looking at how HDC delivers its services and involves its partners. HDC is proactive in relation to the impending district growth projections at a difficult and complex time. In order to meet challenges associated with these demands, HDC will plan, act and resource itself adequately. Namely, HDC needs to look at reducing or removing barriers to growth, being more responsive to key partnerships in the community, have the right skills and be solution focused. Innovation, display a business mindset. The challenges and the opportunity HDC faces in responding to growth has increased the level of total business risk required to be taken on the organisation in order to deliver our vision. HDC believes that over 2024 beyond, it has the leadership in place to bear this higher level of risk and to manage and mitigate it downwards to appropriate and acceptable levels of risk exposure. It is rare for any significant risk facing HDC to be purely composed of just one type of risk or to relate solely to impact of one area. And that's the complexities of local government that a lot of people don't understand, even the private sector. Most significant and large-scale risks will commonly compose of several risks and often have a relationship and interdependency and impact the likelihood. Articulating a risk appetite for the organisation as complex as local government agencies such as a council in a single statement would be confusing and inadequate in providing the understanding and visibility that our community and partnerships desire. Important to supporting Horowhenua District Council in its efforts to connecting with our communities, providing a more detailed risk appetite framework that is reviewed annually would be more in tune with HDC's ever-evolving landscape, i.e. economic environment, including global markets and district growth. Central government reforms, climate change, social and global cohesion and climate change are linked twice. So as I mentioned earlier, so that's the landscape I believe that we sit in. I guess it's subjective and there possibly might be some other opinions around that. But from the base of that landscape, I've formulated a draft statement that I believe sort of represents where we're at the moment, and from the work that has been done, and I'm looking for feedback on that, and possibly wordsmithing, or whether I'm in the completely wrong direction. I've got broad shoulders. As I've mentioned right through this, I've been watching, listening, surveying, communicating, watching votes and all those sorts of things and seeing where we're going to try and get a grasp and understanding of where our risk appetite sits with our new council. So the draft statement, as I see it at the moment, the Horowhenua District Council is responsible to the community and the ratepayers of the district to enable democratic local decision making and action by and on behalf of communities to promote the social, economic, environmental and cultural well-being of the communities in the present and for the future. To achieve these outcomes, Council has a conservative appetite toward risks that would adversely affect core services. In contrast, there is a desire to leverage opportunities and enhance outcomes for the community. As a result, there is a more open approach to considering innovation solutions that create long-term benefits. Accordingly, whilst the overarching risk appetite may be conservative, Council recognises that it is not possible or necessarily desirable to eliminate all the risks inherent in its activities. In some instances, acceptance of risk within the public sector is necessary due to the nature of its services, constraints within the operating environment, or a limited ability to directly influence where risks are shared across sectors. Therefore, in relation to the long-term plan strategic priority areas, Council risk appetite may vary depending on the circumstances and trade-offs implicit in the specific context. Resources are aligned to the priority outcomes based in the specific risk appetite, and arrangements are in place to monitor and mitigate these risks to acceptable levels. Equally important is supporting this risk appetite statement aligned with each of our community outcomes, areas and long-term plan and Council on the page. So I think a key bit of work at the moment is part of the long-term plan work that's going on and ensuring that our risks are articulated in that and very visible to those that are reading the document. So that's a starting point, I guess, from a risk statement perspective to where I believe we sit. I'm more than happy to take feedback on that. However, contextually, I think there is a lot that sits behind that we can go through post this discussion. Yeah, sure.
Testing. Sorry, right, good to go now. If I could just make a comment, I think that's a good general start. I'm not sure that the wee statement you've got on the second paragraph down, it says the council has a conservative appetite towards risks that could adversely affect core services. Doesn't sound quite right. I'm not sure the conservative approach necessarily creates an adverse effect on core services. And the only other suggestion I've got is perhaps in this statement it would be useful to understand what risks are non-negotiable or remain extremely conservative. So things like health and safety, risk to staff, or financial losses. There may be some things like that I think it would be really useful for the reader to understand what's just not negotiable.
And just some context to that too, some of those things as I go through them, like health and safety is mentioned in the top 10 priorities as one of the work streams, and if I explain how that looks and works, it indicates that we're not negotiable, but it may not be strong enough and it may need some other, may need to be articulated in a different way. So thank you for that feedback. Cool. Any other feedback on that people would agree or disagree with or would like to see changed? Shall I carry on? Cool. One of the reasons I've mapped it as a framework is because there is a lot of behind that statement. There is a lot that we need to make visible, and so as part of that, I have provided statements to each of our key deliverables, the 5 key community outcomes. So if you turn over to the strategy outcomes, the table which I've outlined as Appendix 1 below shows the 5 community outcomes that ultimately signal and describe our strategic intent as an organisation. Each community outcome is indicated on where our appetite has been in the past and where it sits currently in orange, and where our leadership group and EM aspire it to be, which is in green, and maximising and achieving our potential in community outcomes. So I've also contributed a risk statement to each one of those too, so it's a little bit more accurate. So from a partnership tangata whenua perspective, and through the survey and through a lot of discussion, there is a real appetite for us to grow in our partnerships, even from a Māori engagement perspective. Our newly formed council has a collective willingness to engage in effective, mutually beneficial partnerships, particularly with Māori, to help us achieve our community outcomes and core priorities of the long-term plan. Our community leaders have opened the door for our organisation to adopt the tools and resources that see our organisation partnerships grow and flourish, i.e. the Māori engagement strategy. And I've just put below that 14.7. So the question that was asked in the survey, 14 strongly agreed to that, and 3 disagreed. So it showed that there was a strong collective group willingness to move out of that conservative approach to partnership, particularly our tangata whenua, and move into a more justified. I'm not sure that the reason that it didn't go to totally flexible is there's a key question around co-governance that possibly could influence the appetite. So at this stage, I feel that the thinking and talk today has been more around a justified approach that provides us with significantly improved partnerships.
Can I query how having significantly improved partnerships is more risky than not? Like, we're talking a risk framework here. I'm not quite sure. Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Like, so the exact one you just read out,
Mm.
yeah, I would say before we were averse, is developing a partnership with Tangata Whenua not a good thing to do and reduces our risk?
Yes. So our approach is justified in improving that.
Yeah.
So
when we're looking at this scale, it says we want to be more risky with partnership. If anything, we want to be less risky by forming partnerships. Is kind of, yeah.
Oh, I see.
We can talk again on the next one because I've kind of got the same issue.
Thing. Yeah. So maybe
about outstanding environment, we want to be completely flexible on if we care about the environment.
Yeah.
So
So
we kind of want to be safe on the.
So maybe the description is wrong, but from a justified perspective, we're prepared to put more at risk to achieve greater outcomes from a partnership perspective. So we're prepared to take opportunities that are put in front of us to improve our partnerships. In the past, we've been adverse to that. We haven't. In the past, we have been conservative or adverse to our approach to stepping outside anything other than what was already in front of us from a partnership perspective. So,
are we talking this financial year for where you want to move that as well, or is it longer period?
Longer period.
It's a longer period.
Yeah. From an outcome perspective, because I guess Rogan, in respect to your question, if we wanted to carry on the same line, then we wouldn't look at things like a multi-engagement framework. We wouldn't take those risks. We would just say, actually, no, we're happy with how things are. Doing the multi.
I wonder whether it's how we're looking at the question, because I can understand from Rogan's perspective, because arguably we've been quite. You could argue that we've taken a risky approach, like we've had a higher risk appetite through our approach to date, and we actually now have a lower risk appetite when it comes to Māori engagement because we don't want to get it wrong.
Yeah, and this is where it's actually quite hard to get. So instead of looking at it from glass half empty, we're looking at it from glass half full perspective, and it's the same with the outstanding environment. We won't achieve an outstanding environment unless we choose to put at risk, but we'll manage the impact. So putting that at risk might be that we spend more money, invest more money from an outstanding environment perspective, that things that possibly might not work. So I think we're flipping, and this is what this framework does, it flips everything on its side to how we manage it. So possibly I could work on the descriptions. Yeah. Do you think that would help? Is that a concept? Did everyone feel like that when they read it?
Yeah, I thought I interpret it the same as Rogan and read it like it was around the wrong way. But
so from an adverse perspective and conservative perspective, we're not prepared to take any risks. That's how that. We will only accept if it's essential to take a risk. But if so, there's a certain let's focus on the Māori engagement. And it was discussed in the previous conversation. There's a lot of risks involved with us reaching out to partners of and a significant number of groups of iwi that possibly could put a lot of our direction at risk. I don't know. I'm only surmising, but we could be conservative adverse to approaching to those partnerships by just saying, well, actually, no, we'll continue with our democratic process that we have here around this table and making decisions, and we won't partner. Does that make sense? Or is it still confusing?
I feel like it might be that we're getting opportunity mixed up with risk. I certainly think there's a greater opportunity, but I don't think we'd want to do anything risky, and that's for engagement with Maori or engagement with outstanding environment as well. We wouldn't want to do anything that adversely affects the environment. But I agree, there's opportunities.
Would elected members agree with the way that Sarah just framed that then? Yeah.
Just 2 cents. I can see it both ways, but I think it does take some risk out of it if we, for the likes of the iwi engagement, if we've actually got a good framework in place, it enables, I would think, us going forward, like a more stability. But yeah.
I think what that does is it puts us in a better position because the relationship improves. However, how we make decisions, you have to consider those partners or even other stakeholders, depending on the project, and how you give weight to that, and whether we see that as too much risk or actually we're prepared to take more risk. And just in the way it's framed, I guess I interpret it wrong. I hear what Rob's saying, but it just doesn't read that way.
Yeah,
like I get the explanation and I know where that's going, but that's not how it reads, and so someone from the public would probably see it a similar way.
so potentially I think that some of the descriptions need to change.
Because Sarah, for you, it was around taking more seizing more opportunities in this space, and therefore reducing the risk of the relationships.
And to be perfectly honest with you, I have approached this from an opportunity perspective.
I think it reads that way, exactly, and I think we just need to take it back. This is about the risk appetite, and I think if you're reading the way this is written, it's like we're prepared to take a lot of risks with a relationship, and I don't actually think that's what we mean. I think we want to say that there's a lot of opportunities we'd like to take, but it needs to come back to the risk. This is about the risk appetite of the council.
Okay. So I guess...
But, sorry, aren't we being quite risky in creating this framework? Because I think that's what we're trying to do over the next period, is create a partnership framework where we need to be, in my mind, we need to be flexible. We need to, where the highest returns might develop from creating that framework. So to me, it's about even, accepting more risk in terms of while we develop the framework. Might change after we have developed the framework, but for now, while we're creating it, it's different.
I have to agree too, because the description isn't what we are.
No.
The description is what we want to achieve. And you're reading it as if we're putting that at risk, and we're not putting that at risk by going. If we go first, then we're putting that description at risk.
I think we would probably have a more robust conversation if we moved to the outstanding environment example instead of the partnership with Tangata Whenua one. It might inspire some others to speak. But I mean, yeah, and that one where I read we're moving to the green, we want to be more flexible with the risk to our outstanding environment, is how I.
Outstanding environment. We've got to be taking more risk. That's right. That's what you're saying.
Back to the description, that's not what we are now. I'm indicating that we're very conservative towards our environment. we don't even have an environment strategy. So we're not protecting it by being adverse or conservative. We are being detrimental to its improvement.
Yeah, so Rob, I think what we've got here is a lens or a context that people are reading it through. Because if we use the outstanding environment one as an example, if I give you a kind of real life example, not related to Horowhenua, but a previous life where council had a failed wastewater treatment plant, they'd spent $9 million on it, turns out it was a lemon, and it was a lemon because it was at the time considered innovative, and council had a high risk appetite at that time to try something different to resolve its wastewater situation. Off the back of that, their risk appetite for trying new things, pushing the barrow in terms of what the wastewater solution might have been, was actually really, really low risk because they didn't want to have a consequence like they had experienced before. So I think some of us will read this and look at it through what will happen lens versus what the opportunity to do something is lens.
Yeah, Rob is saying the same thing, what we want to achieve, but he's coming from the glass half full version, and that's kind of not how some of us read it. But
yeah,
that's all.
Can I jump in?
Front end topics, for example, there's.
Go ahead, Councillor Jennings.
Yeah, I just think we've got to remind ourselves about what this is. It's an appetite statement. So it's about our appetite for risks to achieve outcomes, to achieve those community outcomes. What is our level of appetite for risk? And so I take the outstanding environment, and I think it's pitched absolutely correctly, because at the moment we take an ultra cautious approach. And so think about Lake Horowhenua as an example. We take an ultra cautious approach to iwi relationships. We take an ultra cautious approach to our environmental response. And what this appetite statement is saying, actually, no, we're willing to move in those spaces, move more quickly in order to secure a better outcome. So I'm absolutely in alignment with what how Bernie described it and how Rob describes it. I think this is the right pitch for us. And if we're worried about how it's going to be received by the community, then that's on us in terms of educating them about the purpose of this document. Because I think that this framework's got to help inform our future decision making, because we will hold each other to account and say, hey, no, we agreed when we put this appetite statement together that we had greater appetite to do more in this space or to take some greater risks in this space because we could see that it's about securing better outcomes or whatever. So hearing the feedback around the concerns, but I just think that the pitch and the tone is actually the right direction, in my opinion.
And Sam, that's really well expressed, and you've convinced me. Thanks for that.
I have a question for Monique, though, or you might know the answer. Obviously, audit, they go through our annual reports and such and LTP documents. Do they take any notice of this? Because sometimes, or often, we're critiqued around how it's not easy for our community to understand. And someone who's been here 10 years and someone who's been here 1 year, and we read it the same, like, come on, you can't expect the community to take that on board and, you will just educate them.
To be perfectly honest with you, I didn't give Audit New Zealand a thought when I designed this. Okay. I wouldn't know, and to be perfectly honest with you, I think we paid them too much anyway. But I'm probably more I think there's some good feedback here, and there's an opportunity for me to change the descriptions to make it easier to digest.
Sam's explanation of it made it better for me, and I think it could be as simple as potentially just moving that outcome column to the other side. If this was broken down by the 5 categories of risk, financial, and so on, and it said, this is our goal and this is our risk appetite in each category, then I would have been, full on board. But when you look at this at first glance, you go, this is the risk we're willing to put on this outcome, as opposed to the risk of over those 5 categories that we're willing to put to achieve that outcome. So if you can magic that table to reflect that nicer, maybe as simple as flicking it to the other side and go.
And the reason that, just another point too, is from a partnership perspective, I've got the tick at the end of the arrow because potentially from an appetite perspective, that's what we're already working towards through the multi-engagement and things like that, where with the outstanding environment perspective, there's still a lot of work for us to move towards that tick. So those are little things that I guess meant a lot to me when I was designing it, and probably won't be picked up by the audience, but that just sort of, from a framework perspective, helps understand where I was coming from when I drove this. But I agree in respect to Councillor Boyle's feedback that making those subtle changes will help, and also just possibly looking at the wordsmithing around the descriptions of each risk.
Sarah, did you have something else you wanted to add there?
No, that's good. It's all good. Thank you. Thanks.
Sorry, no, I don't really think anything to add. Just to be clear, I think perhaps your descriptions are right. It is about what you're trying to achieve here, as opposed to if I said to you, so what's a justified risk when we've got an outstanding environment? The way it's written at the moment is that we would potentially take quite a high risk for something to do with the environment. It would be just useful to understand, even if you could give me an example of what that would look like. But I actually think it's more about the opportunity. So flipping it the other way might be.
An outstanding environment that we might be more prepared to take a higher risk with investment. So, and I have got a lot of workings that sit beneath this, but and that's just from collected from the last 10 to 11 months. But generally, I need to ensure that this articulates itself well to the audience. So I do think that it needs a little bit of work.
Rob, are those arrows lengths deliberate in terms of either just getting into the green box or?
Yes, they are.
They are deliberate.
They are deliberate.
Okay.
Yeah, because I think there's a lot of unknown as well. We've taken some quite big steps even in partnership this year, but we don't know where that's going to land from an appetite perspective. It would be wrong of us to just tick, I could have gone through and ticked all of them as being justified and flexible, but we have to be real about what we're willing to tolerate in relation to certain things.
And the environment tick, should that be in the green box rather than the orange box then?
No, because generally we have quite a bit of work from getting back to basics around the environment. So we are still clearly sitting in the conservative side, is my opinion. Whereas we're already starting to do a fair, and please, I'm more than happy to change those ticks and change the colours of boxes, but we are already starting to do a lot of work around engaging in partnership work. And I guess probably to me, more importantly, is the statements that sit below them, around the risk statement for a partnership. Our newly formed council has a collective willingness to engage in effective, mutually beneficial partnerships. That's key to how we feel. Oh, sorry.
I'm enjoying the call at all, and thanking those that are giving me a bit more clarity and understanding this. I just sort of felt like it's almost like I feel like there's a bit of a key missing. Like when you just said, Bernie, the ticks, where they're placed, the arrow, the length of arrows. It would be good to actually understand, have some meaning to that, so that we can reference that when we're looking at the chart as well. So, and anything else you feel that might just help us understand the roadmap, I suppose, is what I'm sort of thinking.
That's great feedback. Thank you. Yeah, and so I think there's quite a bit that we can actually do to the formatting of it and to the description side. So from a statement perspective too, I'm looking for feedback on that as well.
Rob, I'd potentially suggest thinking about the things you've got sitting underneath, thinking about revisiting the environmental statement, because on the surface of it, the way I read it is like we're moving into a more justified, flexible space of preparedness to take some form of risk to the betterment of the environment, which is, I think, where we probably ideally want to aspire to be. Yet, in the justification statement, we've indicated we've got a climate plan action change that's adopted in June of 2024, and as a table in terms of indicative direction to officers, we've been very much 50-50 on that. So, to me, actually, the test of where we aspire to be and actually where we're sitting, actually, if we're not prepared to invest in a climate action plan program, then actually we're arguably still very much stuck in conservative, and in some degrees adverse, because we're heading in that direction. Because if you don't acknowledge climate change is needing to be addressed as an environmental concern, then you're going in the other direction to the one that we're forecasting. So, and I know that you've got your surveys that you've done underneath, and so I just, to me, sitting here reading this, that would be the one that stands out to me as doesn't quite like it feels the read of the room.
I think you're actually quite right in that respect too, because I did this before last week's discussion. Yeah.
In terms of the key as well, would it be helpful? I know, Sarah, you asked a question around examples, so maybe through this we could use one of them and then flesh that out in more detail as an example, so the reader then, when they're working through, they can see how one of them works in detail with an example, and then help them to follow through the rest. Would that be useful, do you think?
Not having a climate action plan is actually incredibly highly risky. So I would almost put the starting point out to the right. But it's more than just that. I mean, I think that this particular strategy outcome is not just about having the plan. There's other things in there as well. But it's just interpretation of what goes underneath it all as well. Put on your mic, Rob.
So fit for purpose infrastructure, which is quite contestable at the moment, I guess, with the reforms that are going on as well. I've really summed that up in respect to, although HDC's approach to our water services has been conservative in the past, mainly impacted by current water service reforms and affordability, Council recognises the importance of planning to ensure our infrastructure meets the needs of our future generations and the demands of our expected growth. Council accepts that well-informed decisions are needed in providing justified risks around investing now for the future, i.e. Tararika East West Spine and Tararua Road projects. So I have us sitting there from a real measured approach, so anything that we do around our infrastructure is well-informed, well-measured, and well-supported by documentation. So. Any feedback on that one?
I almost feel, Rob, like that sort of aligns with the outstanding environment. And so, what am I thinking here? New infrastructure, how does that fit with the existing environment? I suppose I could be completely wrong, but I'm just, when you read that, I was like sitting going, oh, that almost marries with the other one, but maybe not.
Okay.
I think the fit for purpose
Rob.
Go ahead, Councillor Jennings.
Oh no, sorry, Ginty, you go first. It's fine.
No, go ahead.
All I was going to say is that obviously with all of our community outcomes and then even the top 10 priorities, we reference growth a lot, right? And it's through the lens, we're looking at growth through the lens of the particular community outcome or whatever. But it's almost like, I'm just thinking above this, maybe we need a paragraph or something that talks about where we'd landed as a table a couple of weeks ago as part of the LTP discussions around the appetite and attitude towards growth. Because I think that kind of sets the scene then for when you interpret and when you read some of the rest of this document, it kind of needs that just overarching growth, attitude or appetite, vision towards growth that just sits across the top of this. Because I think that might also put some of these into context. Because like in that, just hearing Justin's question, like we might have a low appetite. We seem to have quite as a table, we have I can't remember the word, was it a hungry appetite for growth, but we have a low appetite where that growth would negatively impact on existing infrastructure. Like, so it's kind of, or negatively impact on existing residents. So I think it's kind of, it just needs that overarching context, just like in a paragraph or something above these about growth, I think. I think that might help.
Okay. Cool. Thank you. Next one is vibrant economy. Now, just to explain in respect to the fact that there has been quite a bit of discussion around us being quite flexible and justified towards our vibrant economy, but the arrow is, so the appetite has generally always been there, but the current economic climate is pushing our appetite backwards, and that's really been caused by the cost of living crisis. And as per my rates example before, so I've got the cost of living crisis has peaked at a time that HDC focuses on current and future district growth. The unfortunate timing directly impacts on the level of appetite council has for any decisions that may further disadvantage our community financially. At times this will impact on council's appetite to taking risks on investing in projects that may benefit our community and economy in the future. Where council may have been justified in our appetite in this space in the past, there is an acceptance that the current appetite is more conservative for now.
I think are you being a bit optimistic? So the cost of living crisis has peaked.
Yeah, possibly. Should I could change that, has appeared.
Well, I
has
think
appeared
it's
at the time that
I'm
actually,
sure we could use.
Yeah.
It's continuing or something.
Yeah. But I guess it is taking away. It's stating that it's taking away our appetite, to take risks. Yeah, but that might change given based on our economy. Yeah. Cool. And then strong communities. We value the diversity of our people. So I guess our appetite has always been high for that in respect to applying resources and taking opportunities. I shouldn't use the word risk, to meeting those goals. Council is committed to supporting our organisation to achieve and excel in what we do, keen to innovate new ideas and invest in appropriate skills. Council is justified and flexible in its appetite to enhance and build stronger communities. Council is open to supporting our recently established executive and teams in stripping down tradition and legacy that stymies positive advancement, back to basics and rebuilding our foundation that enables our service delivery to thrive in building diversity, positive and healthy lifestyles for all those that reside in our district.
How does everybody feel about where we are in that statement and where we're heading? That we agree in terms of where we sit in that space?
Can I just test something with the table? Is that okay?
Go for it. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, just reflecting on the feedback from people as we went through the community outcomes, where like under each of those community outcomes, there's obviously a broad range of things that come under that outcome. And so I'm just wondering in the risk statement, whether we could just tack on little bits at the end that sort of have the caveats or the limitations. So thinking about like outstanding environment. So we could have the risk statement as it is, but then at the end of it say something like, but not in respect to meeting our consent conditions, where council maintains an adverse risk appetite where we can prioritise compliance or something like that. So we're kind of identifying the specific parts or aspects under those community outcomes where we're actually not willing to compromise, or where we want to take a pretty low risk approach. Because I think that how it's pitched is good. Personally, I like it, but I accept that there are some circumstances where you might want to say, well, yeah, we've kind of got a high risk appetite in this context, but not in these sort of more specific things. Would that work, Rob, or is that going to create a bit of mess?
Rob, can I just jump in, if that's okay? I think that's what I suggested that we put in the actual risk appetite statement. What risks are non-negotiable? So they didn't need to go under any of the community outcomes, but rather it's in a statement that things like blowing the budget for a certain amount of money, or creating a negative impact on the environment, or not being regulatory compliant. I mean, I could go on. There are a few of them, but that should be actually in the statement as opposed to under each of the community outcomes. And I think then everybody gets a very good idea of then how you're applying things to those community outcomes below.
Yeah, I think I'd support that. Because you could almost even have it as a little separate box underneath the risk statement, just non-negotiables or whatever. Because I think that's the way of like finding that sweet spot between like just hearing the conversation around the table, being really clear about where we're not willing to compromise.
I think that councillors have probably already given a signal to what those bottom lines are, because if you read your 22-page CEO KPI document, they're through that. Like it talks about the variance of budget, it talks about the abatement notices, it talks about the upheld Lagoima or ombudsman complaints. It talks about the Standard & Poor's rating. And there'll be one other probably, because 5's a good number.
So are you saying it's overkill to put it in this document, or are you just saying that we know it and it could inform this document?
I don't. I think it's a really good idea and insightful to have the bottom lines. All I'm saying is I think council probably already know what the bottom lines are because you've articulated it in a different format.
Yeah, cool. Okay.
So to carry on to our top 10 priorities, And I haven't provided statements with these because they're overarching in our 5 community outcomes, and I didn't want the document to become overly prescriptive in respect to what we achieve from an appetite perspective, and that's why I guess we do have an appetite and tolerances. But I just worked on areas that we were currently seen as that sat beneath our top 10 priorities. So we have listed here in the yellowy orange as it's listed on Council One page, and then underneath some of the key work objectives that we're working through as a council and as officers to achieving those outcomes. So I guess, again, looking for feedback around our previous discussion about the measurement and the glass half full approach, I guess, opportunity perspective to where we're currently sitting at the moment, and I take on board that a key would be good in line with this as well. But I've tried to put examples to what possibly, or scenarios that will allow us to indicate where we want to be a little bit more accurately. So like integrated and streamlined consenting, appreciate that we're adverse to anything that's non-compliant in that respect. However, looking from a growth planning perspective, we want to improve that from an integrated and streamlined consenting process, because that's what our community are asking for. So yeah, interested in feedback on, one, the formatting of this, and two, any concern or reaction areas. Remembering too that often as we move those scenarios, it comes trade-offs on cost and things like that. So we can always aspire to be fully researched and provide a fully researched source consenting team that delivers market-leading applications and innovation and provides an efficient and fully effective streamlined consenting system. But there would possibly be some significant amount of investment to achieve that.
Just double checking then, as opposed to the previous community outcome set where it's better to be sitting at this end than the other. Like the green rather than the orange.
It's still, from a scenario perspective, if you look at a scenario on the left-hand side, it'll be a lot more.
So health and safety.
Yeah, would be at
we're now putting it at the opposite end, because the death and the injuries over here and the no incidents is over here.
So when we come to things like health and safety, we're adverse. We don't.
Which is like, but in terms of consistency, in this section we read it that way, and in this section we're reading it the other way. That was my point about format. That's all. Otherwise.
Again, just from my perspective, sorry if I sound like a stuck record, I don't see that risk is actually discussed in here. Again, there's some fantastic opportunities, and I can see why you aspire to them, but this is about the risk tolerance. How risky is the enabling affordable housing? And you're talking about a consenting process. If we're taking the integrated and streamlined consenting, what's the risk?
Well, I guess you need to probably understand the business, because affordable housing comes at a cost to the council. So there are, and we can't be that prescriptive. Otherwise, we're going to have a document that's probably bigger than our long-term plan. Maybe the format is wrong.
Sarah, is what you're saying then in terms of the house? Actually, I'll let you say what you're saying.
Oh, no, sorry. I was just going to say, in this particular line here, you've got consenting. So that is quite specific. And I would assume that there's a lot of regulations that go with the consent process. So you would need to be very risk averse. You'd have to follow regulation. You'd have to apply it consistently. And so averse or conservative would be appropriate. But I don't know what the risk would look like when you get up to measured, justified or flexible.
Yeah, but you're taking it off the consenting system. This is about integrated and streamlined consenting process. So we don't have a streamlined consenting process at the moment. So it's what we aspire to look at from a service delivery perspective. The risks associated with achieving that increase as you move away from adverse. And if I guess my concern is if I have to start detailing specific risks with each scenario, it will become a significantly big document. So maybe this format is wrong.
Just as a suggestion.
Rob. I did it to you again, Jacinta. You go.
Just thinking about that in relation to the last conversation we had about the ones up the front, in terms of, for example, integrated and streamlined consenting, is somewhere within that line is documenting the risk that's associated with moving to justified and flexible, that the council faces in moving from justified to flexible. What's the key risk that we face as part of that? Is that would help in that conversation?
I think it possibly would. So Rob, if I could just play back to you what you said to me. At the moment, we don't have something that's streamlined, so it's high risk. Is that what you were suggesting?
It is probably a little bit clumsy, yeah. But okay.
Rob, can I ask a question around, again, just coming back to the purpose of this risk statement, this risk appetite statement? For me, like I'm like listening to what Sarah's saying, totally taking all that on board. But I guess I'm just wondering if this risk statement is more about helping us, using this statement as a tool to help us with future decision making and to make sure that we're, sort of an accountability tool for ourselves as we work through all of these key moves and key decisions. And that's kind of what's reflected in these top 10 priorities tables, is it's about, you've listened and you've heard where the table sits in terms of the key moves and key decisions that are upcoming. And so that's why we've concentrated on those as sort of risk streams in this document. That's not to say that we don't have risk tolerance around other things like, for example, consenting and consenting compliance and those kind of things. But what I've picked up on is, I think that this, in terms of a tool, you're trying to capture not everything here, but really it's more about those decision making. It's to support our upcoming decision making. And so the question that Sarah's raising around, well, do we need some sort of document that captures tolerance around a broader set of risks? I mean, that's probably a conversation we should have. But can you just confirm my sort of impression of this document and how you've put together this table? Is that the kind of the approach that you've taken, that it's about key moves, key decisions?
I guess the biggest concern I guess the position we find ourselves in at the moment is I have never seen a risk as a negative thing. I've always seen a risk as an opportunity. Now, it's easy for me to put on there that, and I think you're looking at it from and correct me if I'm wrong, Sarah, but I think you're looking at this from a risk perspective being a negative outcome. But I don't see it in that space. Like you're mentioning the fact that we want to know what is not negotiable. Well, those sort of things are legislated anyway. So we know what's not negotiable when it comes to certain things. And as I mentioned earlier, I can put on there that we have a tolerance level to lose $2 million through some form of revenue or expenditure costs. But really, we have an appetite to lose nothing. So what are we achieving by putting $2 million? That if we lose $2 million, we're going to accept it? I'm really aiming this around our back to basics, what we're trying to achieve in the next 3 years or 2 to 3 years based on risks and opportunities. Every decision we make as a risk has a trade-off to achieve an opportunity. And I don't see consenting as a risk. Now, we have mitigations for that, what risks are associated with consenting, and generally that's outlined in insurance through public liability. So that allows us to take opportunities if we want to streamline. Now, sure, we will do everything we can from a compliance perspective to achieve not needing that insurance coverage or getting it right all the time. However, if we don't continue to take risks around moving forward in most areas that we are as a council, and we remain adverse around even losing money, then our decisions will be to terminate a risk rather than to transfer it or mitigate it. So I'm really, I guess I have come into this approaching it from a different mindset to probably than what was expected. And so it's providing a high level of confusion. Because
Can I just? I quite like where you're coming from and how you've framed it and how you've explained it. I mean, just in a nutshell, for me, the risk appetite drives or determines the distribution of our resources, and this is council, like this table, this is our risk appetite, and once it lands here, it might get tweaked a bit, but as it lands, pretty much my understanding is the business, the machine out there takes this and they work according to this. Okay, so if there's something that you're concerned about, this is the time. Otherwise, this is it.
Because, can I give you a really good example? I was given the opportunity to do an insurance renewal submission. Now, if I put that on here in the left column and we had an adverse appetite, we would be paying the same premium again this year as we've paid for the last 5 years. Now, through information and through a selective number of steps, deductibles, extension layers, papers to the council have been flexible, or actually they've been really aggressive in being prepared to take risks that are potentially saving us 1% on rates. We would have never have got to that if the council didn't have that appetite. And so if you put that against this table, we would be marked in the flexible area because we have taken a serious number of risks. If you had put it in a glass half empty, we would be adverse. So I'm creating a pathway for us to be unique in our approach to a risk appetite that focuses on the opportunities with the risks that are in front of us. Now, I understand what you're saying, Sarah, but let's use the integrated streamlined consenting perspective. At the moment, we have consenting. It's not integrated and it's not streamlined. Okay, so if we want it to remain the same, consenting process has been established for a number of years. It should be left as it is to ensure compliance standards are met and existing limited resources are stretched anymore. Then council should indicate that they're averse, and that's so officers don't waste their time in innovation and trying to provide our community with a much better system.
Rob, I think they're both good examples, and I think the first one, you're absolutely right, it was completely averse. And I think that when the renewal was done for the insurance, it was considered in terms of how much and the likelihood, which is other stuff that you've actually presented us before. What's the likelihood of it happening, and what's the cost on it? And I can see that in the streamlining consenting, there's a lot of opportunities for enhancement. And I guess I'm just asking, and perhaps I am looking at it from a negative perspective when it comes to risk, and you're absolutely right, there are opportunities as well. But I'm not sure that the way you've got that going right out is that we'd be completely flexible, and I'm just struggling, and it's my understanding of just what that would look like.
Era for us to hear and listen to, so that we can think about how we can adapt the risk appetite statement to, I suppose, to reflect that feedback.
And that's the question I'm asking. Have I got that arrow extended too far?
Sorry, I'm not speaking to your arrow specifically, but more following along the lines of what Monique said, raises for me the point that the business, the users of how what you've articulated, I just want to be sure that they're going to interpret it how you are and not read it how I initially was, because therein lies, like, I don't want them to get the wrong end of the stick like I did and then act or take action, in the opposite direction than what you've described, because what you're saying is good, like, I agree with that, but I just wouldn't want the users of this document to then interpret it wrong.
Councillor Grimstone, you had a question there?
How would the inclusion and henceforth the rating and the direction of travel on a top 10 project that's multifaceted with a whole number of risks provide the framework or help inform a council staff member around this table's risk appetite? And do other councils specifically go out and rate their top 10 projects to this level? And I'm just wondering whether we're trying to go down deeper than actually we need to, that is largely set by working through the outcome priorities anyway, by discussion. Just
other councils generally have a statement and a graph that indicates to the level of their appetite against the 5 ISO, so reputation, finance, strategy. So the 5, and that's what I presented last time, but I really did get a push from council to head up towards our community outcomes and our top 10 priorities.
So at the last workshop, councillors said, can we interweave our top 10 priorities and community outcomes into this?
Which this discussion may indicate was probably a quick fail learn based on the conversation so far around it.
Yeah,
I agree. This is
Councillor Chukwuka, what you were saying before, and also Sarah, you as well, in terms of for example, integrated and streamlined consenting. It's great to work through that process. Just as in what I'm hearing is possibly though, it's just putting a little bit more description around it in heading from an integrated and streamlined consenting process from adverse to flexible. These are some of the risks the council would face at this level, and then moving to the flexible, these are the types of risks that we would face, just so that there is that context around it. Would that be helpful?
Certainly would be, and I can see how you've struggled to take what was suggested last time, Rob, in terms of what was the traditional, what are the key areas that we need to be saying, how risk averse or risk tolerant are we on those items, to then the community outcomes. So I think what you suggested, Jacinta, would probably be quite helpful.
Sam, do you want to tell everyone what you've put on the chat?
Just well, people can read it for themselves. I just think I've like, reflecting on the discussion today, I think if we accept that this risk statement might not meet all of our expectations. It might not be perfect from all perspectives, but I think we need to give something a go. I think we need to give it a go. And I'm really, I have a huge amount of trust and confidence in all the work that Rob's been doing, and I've been working closely with Rob, obviously through the Risk and Assurance Committee, and I really value his work. And so when he talks about, trying something different as a council, and perhaps not just doing the traditional boring risk appetite statement that we had, or a spreadsheet that goes through every single every single risk area. Like I feel like maybe this is worth giving this a go. We have some specific evaluation criteria that we use in 12 months' time to get a sense of how people think it's gone. And yes, I mean, I know there'll be concern about, well, how much damage could happen in the interim if we did just go down this track with things in place. But I'd be keen to hear others' thoughts on what's the actual appetite to give this a try, pilot it. There's obviously some refinements that can be taken away, but this is something we could absolutely work to death, and it could take hours upon hours to try and get it absolutely perfect. But sometimes it feels like the direction of travel is right for me. The tone, the pitch is right for me. Subject to some refinements to pick up on some of the feedback today, I kind of feel like we're in a pretty good space, actually.
I think I generally heard that from the table as well, but with a bit more description so that there isn't any confusion from a reader in terms of what the intention is, and making sure in all the instances that the risk is described as well. Would that be a fair?
Yeah, I support it moving forward, and with those tweaks, additions like keys and the things that you noted, which Sarah supports too. In 12 months' time, I mean, ultimately, risk changes and it moves, and I'm happy. It's only a 12-page document when you think about it. It's not it's pretty good. Yeah.
A lot of the document has been about explaining where we've got to, which would come out in respect to the fact that you're quite right. Potentially, there's only really 12 pages that are. But I guess based on the feedback, which I've written down quite a bit, I would like to take it and massage it to try and clarify some of the concerns around making it a more measurable document, usable document, or well-articulated document.
Rob, look, I agree with Sam. I think you've done a fantastic job with this. I mean, it's a heck of a lot deeper dive than we've ever done, ever before on risk. The fact that it aligns with our community outcomes and our top 10 priorities, I think, is a major step forward. We can easily see, the direction of the arrow is in the place. It's just about, if you like, the length of that arrow and whether we go to the green. But I think this can be monitored and will be a talking discussion point for future risk and assurance committees that will be really, really valuable as to where we are sitting with a lot of these projects. So, thank you. I'm sure you will continue to massage, and while we'll never be totally happy, I'm sure we can reach a really good consensus on where we are at the moment. Cheers.
Councillor Olsen?
Yeah, no, all I was going to do is say similar sort of things. I think probably a review in 12 months' time, and then someone would be user-friendly, if you like, and sort of treat it as a working document during that period, when we do review it, to allow some alterations. And this will be, as we touch on some of these things, the content in here, and tick them off and get a plan in place, like that, strategies and stuff, then it'll actually, it should dovetail into this document.
And as well as we're get into the November, December LTP conversations, this should absolutely be one of the items that sits on the table in terms of investment decisions and where we're heading. So thanks for your time.
Yeah, and if I could just reiterate, Rob, I think you've done a very good job on this as well. It's not easy to do, and I think just like you did with one of the examples around the insurance, the reinsurance, I think that was a great example. Put some recent decisions through it as well and make sure that you think it can kind of match what you're looking for, and I think that will be really helpful.
Thank you.
That's a really good point, Sarah, about putting some recent decisions through. Because one of the things I wondered, Rob, is if you could just briefly talk about, so we'll massage it, we'll bring it to council and we'll land it, but maybe if you could just talk to councillors about how they'll then see this translated into a decision-making report. So if we think about the current council template around risk assessment and analysis, when they're making a call, how are we going to use the risk appetite statement as a reference point? Because it's not just about setting the tone to the business, it's also about reminding the table about what they've said their risk appetite is.
Yeah, so I suggest that every officer brings it with them to when they're making submissions, and opens it to the page if anyone objects. But no, for me, it really is the beginning, and it has taken time to get here, and in respect to the journey, it's taken this time more around my lack of understanding of local government. I can say that dealing in private business is far less complex than dealing in local government. And so generally risk appetite work is a lot simpler and is really easy to base around reputation and the 5 ISO outcomes from a strategic and financial perspective. From a framework perspective, for me, it needs to sit front and centre of the risk management framework, and it needs to, as to Monique's point around setting the tone when our officers are working on documents, to whether the council is adverse to us taking risks or flexible on us taking risks when it comes to top 10 priorities and achieving our goals. And I guess for me, it's around trying to articulate that more through council officers. From a maturity perspective, this is a huge, significant document to changing our culture, and that's why it's been so important to us. It's important to me that we get it right, and so I really appreciate the feedback tonight in trying to improve that visibility. But when it comes to our, when we're making submissions, we've done some really good examples and some really bad examples in the last 10 months around certain submissions and seeking certain resolutions. And the examples that we're starting to use now are really based on the risk appetite that we feel councillors are looking for, and are really, to Sarah's point, they really are backed up by information and context around risk assessment. And so this will help formulate a lot of that risk assessment. We're just starting to work on a lot of the templates from those paperwork submissions. Yeah, in that context, Monique, I see this as being quite a pivotal document to setting the scene, as to your point, but it's also a foundation document to how we present as well.
Rob, I just wanted to thank you as well, because I've got a whole lot more clarity understanding this document now. I also appreciate everyone's feedback, and yours, Sarah, I think was really great tonight. It just helped me understand flipping things over sometimes and looking at them from another perspective. The only part I had was we had the survey stuff shown in the partnering with Tangata Whenua. Was that the only survey data we could apply?
No, it's intertwined all the way through it. It's just, and I have a separate document that is broken down specific to that, if the council were more than happy to see that, but it's only a very small part. Well, it's only a very small part to how I formulated our approach approach to each outcome. But what it did for me, because sometimes when I'm watching council meetings, it's really hard to decipher which way the council's leaning, and especially since I've introduced Slido. There was a lot of 50-50 calls. So that gave me a good insight from an individual perspective to how people felt about things, and there was no outside influence to that. And to put his point around that, it was an extremely difficult survey to do because there was no trade-offs. But I did really want to understand from an individual perspective what was more of a priority to individuals, so whether it was bridges or compliance or those sorts of things. So it did help a lot, and I do have quite a good document that I'm more than happy to share.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Jacinda. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Do you want to finish, or do you want to do the other one? How long does it take? No worries. It's just really information, though, isn't it? It's no direction or decision making stuff.
No directional decision making.